Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. I knew before we even started that I was completely underprepared for the fishing trip. Fishing had never really been my thing. It was Matt's thing first. Then Noah got into it. And eventually I started tagging along because that was what friends did. I learned just enough to avoid looking completely useless. I knew how to cast. I knew how to tie on a lure if someone reminded me which not to use. I could tell the difference between a trout and a bass. That was about the full extent of my fishing knowledge. If I'm being completely truthful, I don't even like fishing that much. I like spending time with my friends. That was the real reason I kept going. Matt, Noah, and I had been friends for years, and as we got closer to 30, I'd watched both of them move through different hobbies with an enthusiasm I honestly admired. There had been camping, cycling, rock climbing, a brief and expensive obsession with home brewing. Then fishing came along, and unlike most of their previous hobbies, this one seemed to stick. I didn't understand the appeal of standing in cold water for hours, hoping an animal would bite a hook. But if it gave us an excuse to spend a Saturday together, I was willing to go. That evening, I pulled into a parking area beside a newly developed neighborhood on the edge of town. The houses there looked almost too clean. Fresh sidewalks, young trees, new streetlights. The kind of neighborhood where everything had been built in the last couple of years. It felt strange because less than half a mile beyond those houses was an old stretch of marshland, and farther beyond that, a dam that looked as if it belonged to another century. I spotted Matt and Noah parking beside each other on the other side of the lot. I grabbed my fishing rod from the back seat and walked over. Matt looked at me once and immediately started laughing. "Where's your tackle box?" I looked down at my rod. "I don't need one." Noah got out of his car wearing rubber fishing waders that came halfway up his body. He stared at my t-shirt. "You going to be warm enough in that?" "It isn't cold. It will be." I inspected the lure hanging from my line. It was one of those 5 diamond spoons Matt had told me to buy. I flicked it with one finger and watched it spin. "This is all I need." Noah grinned. "Sure, big guy. Let me know when you actually catch something." He slapped me on the shoulder and started toward the trail. I followed them. For the first 10 minutes, I mostly listened as Matt and Noah talked about their previous fishing trip. They argued about what bait had worked best, where someone had caught a huge trout, and which rod was worth buying next. Every now and then, one of them glanced back at me, but they weren't really checking on me. They were just completely absorbed in their hobby. Normally, that would have bothered me a little. That day, I didn't mind. We had known each other long enough that nobody needed to force conversation. The trail eventually disappeared into marshland. The ground became softer and wetter, and we had to carefully choose where we stepped. Matt looked back at my boots. Well, at least he wore the right shoes. I did a little dance in my hiking boots. "See? Professional fisherman. Those are probably the only useful thing you brought," Noah said. "These are pretty good for running, too." I nodded at their waders. "Better than those goofy rubber pants you 2 jackasses are wearing." "They're called waders," Noah said, sounding genuinely offended. I know what they're called. They still look ridiculous. Matt laughed. Did anyone bring beer? Noah tapped his backpack. Obviously, then he looked at me. Jack? I reached into the deep pockets of my pants and tapped the 2 cans I'd brought. Noah nodded. Okay, I take it back. You're half prepared. We kept walking. That was when the dam finally came into view. I had seen it from a distance before, usually while driving through that part of town, but I'd never been close to it. Up close, it was much larger than I expected, and much uglier. The structure rose above the river like a huge slab of aging concrete and rusted metal. Dark rain clouds were moving in from the west, making the whole thing look even more severe against the sky. Birds circled, high above it. At first, I didn't think anything of that. Then I realized none of them were landing. They circled. They passed over the structure. Some came close to the wall, but not one bird settled on it. The concrete itself was streaked white from years of bird droppings, so clearly birds had used it before. They just weren't doing it now. Around several entrances in the base of the dam stood chain-link fencing that had rusted so badly it was almost brown. Parts of it sagged. Signs had faded until most of the writing was impossible to read. The whole place looked forgotten. I had never really understood why the dam existed. The river wasn't especially large. Even during heavy rain, flooding usually affected other waterways around the city more than this one. The dam seemed far too big for what it was holding back. Judging by its condition, I sometimes wondered if the city itself had forgotten why it had been built. The closer we got, the stranger I felt. I stopped for a second and stared at it. Something about the structure made me dizzy, not badly, just enough that I noticed it. Then I noticed something else. The marsh had gone quiet. Earlier, mosquitoes had been swarming around us. I'd been slapping at my arms and neck for half the walk. Now they were gone. Completely no buzzing, no insects moving near the water, very few birds. Even the normal sounds of the marsh seemed distant. You good? Noah's voice snapped me out of it. I blinked. Yeah, you were staring. I've just never seen this thing up close. Matt looked at the dam while preparing his fly rod. It's ugly as hell. He smiled. But you should see the fish around here. Good? Massive, he looked around. Quiet, too. I pointed farther down the river toward the base of the dam. I can make it even quieter. I'll stay over there. Matt laughed. You can fish with us even if you didn't pack properly. Nah, I'm good. I started climbing across the large rocks lining the riverbank. I'll yell fish if I actually catch one. I found a large, flat rock and made myself comfortable. Matt and Noah entered the shallow water farther downstream. I opened one of my beers and took a drink. From where I sat, the dam dominated everything to my right. As I looked at it, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small red light blinked above one of the doorways near the base. Then, another. Hey, I shouted toward the others. You guys see these lights? Matt and Noah looked over at almost exactly the same time. Noah shrugged. Probably sensors. Sensors for what? He was already turning away. No idea. It's fine. I didn't think his answer made much sense. The place looked abandoned. Why would an abandoned dam have working sensors? Still, we weren't trespassing. We weren't crossing fences. We were standing along a public stretch of river. I forced myself to stop thinking about it. I started casting. Nothing again, still nothing. After what must have been close to 50 casts, I had not even felt a bite. The clouds kept moving closer. It was still a warm summer evening, but the wind had started changing. Eventually, I put the rod down beside me. I drank more of my beer and watched the river. Matt and Noah occasionally called something over to me, but even they had become unusually quiet. Earlier, they'd been talking non-stop. Now, the three of us were mostly listening to the water. For a few minutes, it was peaceful. Then, I noticed the dark patch. Near the base of the dam, not far from where I had been casting, there was an area of water that looked completely still. The rest of the river moved normally. There were ripples, small currents, water passing around rocks. But that section didn't move at all. It was darker, too, several shades darker than the water surrounding it. At first, I thought it was simply deeper there. That was probably true. But the longer I looked at it, the more uncomfortable I became. It looked less like a deep spot and more like a hole covered by water. I remembered all those stories people share online about dangerous bacteria or brain-eating amoebas in stagnant water. Obviously, that wasn't what this was. Still, something about that patch made the hair on the back of my neck rise. On the line, Matt shouted. I jumped off the rock and hurried over. He had hooked something big. Noah was helping him control it while I grabbed the net they'd brought. A brown trout finally broke the surface. It was enormous. Matt guided it toward me, and I caught it in the net. Damn, I stared at the fish. It had to be close to 2.5 feet long. Matt looked like a proud father. Told you. Okay, I'll give you that one. Noah pointed his rod toward the river. My turn. You couldn't catch one bigger than this. Watch me. After admiring the fish for another moment, Matt carefully released it. He turned away. I didn't. The trout hit the water and immediately started thrashing. Not just normal movement. It fought through the water like it was trying to get away from something. Its body twisted violently. Then it disappeared downstream. I had only been fishing a handful of times, but I had never seen a released fish behave like that. I went back toward my rock. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Then I noticed the dark patch again. I stopped walking. What the fuck? It was larger, much larger. The still section near the dam had nearly doubled in size. I stared at it. Had something spilled into the river? Oil? Waste? Something from inside the dam? I looked up at the clouds. Rain was probably 20 or 30 minutes away. We're leaving when it starts raining, right? I shouted. Matt laughed. What? No, seriously? That's when the fish come out. I heard Noah say something else, probably another joke about me, but I didn't catch it. A sound had come from the dam. Thump. I turned toward it. Another one. Thump. It was low and irregular. Not metallic exactly, more like something heavy hitting the inside of the concrete wall. It seemed to come from somewhere near water level. I stared at the red blinking lights. There was definitely something operating inside that dam. Maybe pumps, maybe old machinery. I thought about asking Matt and Noah. Then I stopped myself. Every concern I'd mentioned had been laughed off. Maybe they had heard the sound on previous trips. Maybe the dam had some automatic flood control system. Maybe I was just getting nervous because the place looked creepy. I picked up my rod. I cast directly away from the dark water. Not because I expected to catch anything. I just wanted to look normal. The rain began a few minutes later. At first, it was light. Then the sky seemed to open. Within minutes, rain was falling so heavily that I could barely see across the river. Jack. I heard Noah shouting. There was a spare coat in my bag. I ran over and dug through his backpack. By the time I found the raincoat, it was already damp. I pulled it on anyway. Matt and Noah kept fishing. They were insane. Thunder rolled overhead. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the dam. Then I heard the thumping again. Louder. Thump, thump, thump. The rain hammered the river. The water level started rising. Not quickly, but enough to notice. Small rocks along the bank disappeared beneath the surface. Yet the dark patch remained perfectly still. Rain struck it. The river pushed against it. Nothing disturbed it. I stared. Don't tell me I never finished the sentence. A siren exploded from the dam. I clamped both hands over my ears. The sound was deafening. An old emergency siren. Deep, mechanical, loud enough to vibrate in my chest. I shouted toward Matt and Noah. What the hell is going on? Neither answered. We should get out of here. I grabbed my rod and started moving back toward the trail. Then I noticed the fish. They were everywhere. Fish were breaking the surface all across the river. Some jumped completely out of the water. Others thrashed against the current. Every single one seemed to be moving in the same direction. Away from the dam. Noah shouted through the storm. Probably the rain. Relax. This isn't normal. Matt turned toward me. You can leave if you're bored. The wind almost knocked him sideways. Then something hit the inside of the dam. Boom, not a thump this time. A massive impact. All three of us froze. A strange sucking sound followed. The river began dropping. Fast, water pulled away from the bank. Rocks that had been submerged seconds earlier appeared again. The red lights above the dam doors switched off one by one. I stared at the dark patch. As the river level fell, the dark area seemed to sink. Deeper, deeper, like water draining into an enormous, unseen hole. Matt finally stopped fishing. You guys seeing this? His voice sounded different now. No more jokes. Noah started dismantling his rod. Yeah, guys, I said. I started backing away. Move faster. The siren suddenly stopped. The silence afterward felt impossible. Even the thunder seemed distant for half a second. Then, the dark water moved. It swelled upward, not like a wave. The water rose into a mound, a rounded mass several feet above the rest of the river. That should not have been physically possible. Run. I don't remember which of us shouted it. Maybe me. Maybe Matt. Before I could turn, something came through the water. At first, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. A long shape rose through the rain. A neck. At least, I think it was a neck. It bent in several places. Too many places. No animal I knew moved like that. Its skin was almost the same color as the storm clouds. Dark gray. Nearly black. The head moved so quickly that I never saw its shape properly. I heard a deep, wet, guttural sound. Then it dropped toward the riverbank. Noah disappeared. 1 second he was standing there. The next he was gone. I heard him scream. The scream became muffled almost immediately, like he was trapped inside something. Noah, Matt shouted. I ran. There was nothing else I could do. My boots slipped across the wet rocks. For the first time that day, I was grateful I'd worn hiking boots instead of waders. Behind me, I heard Matt fall. Water splashed. There was another low, guttural sound. I almost turned around. I didn't. I didn't hear Matt scream. That bothers me more than if I had. I reached the marsh. My legs were already burning. I heard something enormous moving behind me. Dragging, crushing reeds, pushing through mud. I didn't look back. If I had seen it clearly, I think I might have frozen. I kept running. My boots sank into the soft ground. Several times I almost fell. Somehow, I stayed upright. I could hear my own breathing. The storm. The thing behind me. Then suddenly the dragging stopped. The moment I cleared the marsh, the sound disappeared. I didn't care why. I kept running uphill toward the parking lot. By the time I reached the pavement, I was close to collapsing. Then I saw my car. I pulled the door open and threw myself inside. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. Rain covered the windshield. My vision blurred from adrenaline and tears. For several seconds, I just sat there trying to breathe. Then I looked across the lot. Matt's car, Noah's car, both still there. Empty, that destroyed whatever hope I had been holding on to. I screamed. I don't remember exactly what I screamed. Their names, probably, maybe nothing that made sense. I started the car and drove. I passed their vehicles on the way out. I didn't stop. I called 911 before I even reached home. The police came. Search teams went out. Investigators questioned me for hours. They didn't believe my story. Not the real version. Why would they? 2 men disappeared during a severe storm near an aging dam. There had been flooding. There had been structural damage. The explanation practically wrote itself. Matt and Noah had been swept away. That was the official story. Their bodies were never found. Their cars remained in the parking lot for almost a week before they were eventually towed. I couldn't bring myself to speak to their families properly. I tried. Every time I started, I remembered Noah's scream becoming muffled. I remembered the sound behind Matt. The news did the explaining for me. 2 fishermen presumed dead following catastrophic failure at an old dam. A tragic accident, unsafe weather, flooding aging infrastructure. I watched the reports and felt sick, because it wasn't true. The dam had not simply failed. Something had gotten out. For weeks, I kept thinking about the red warning lights, the siren, the sounds coming from inside, the still water, the way every fish in that river suddenly tried to escape. And then I realized something that scared me even more. The dam was never there to protect the town from the river. It was there to protect the town from whatever lived behind it. That enormous concrete structure wasn't flood control. It was a cage. Somebody knew. Somebody had to. Maybe people in the city government knew. Maybe some department buried deep inside the state knew. Maybe nobody alive remembered the full reason anymore, and they were simply following maintenance procedures written decades ago. Keep the lights working. Keep the sensors active. Keep the wall intact. Do not ask what is behind it. I don't know. But someone knew enough to build that thing in the first place. I spent months avoiding that part of town. I couldn't even drive near the neighborhood without feeling sick. Then last week, curiosity got the better of me. I drove out there. I told myself I only wanted to see the area from the road. I wasn't going near the river. I wasn't getting out of the car. I just needed to know what they had done. The dam was still there. Construction equipment surrounded it. Workers had repaired the enormous section of wall that had been damaged during the storm. I slowed down as I passed. The new concrete looked completely different from the old structure. Fresh, reinforced, massive, and from what I could see, they weren't simply rebuilding the wall the way it had been before. They were making it thicker, much thicker. There were new fences, too. New warning signs. New lights. For the first time since Matt and Noah disappeared, part of me felt relieved. Not because I trusted the dam, not because I believed the thing behind it had gone away, but because the repairs proved one thing. Someone else knows. Someone looked at the damage and decided ordinary repairs weren't enough. Someone decided the wall needed to be stronger this time. So if you ever find an old dam sitting on a river that seems far too small to need one, don't assume it was built for flooding. If you notice that the birds refuse to land on it, pay attention. If the insects disappear as you get closer, turn around. If you see red warning lights blinking above doors that supposedly lead into an abandoned structure, don't convince yourself they're meaningless. And if the water near the wall becomes dark and perfectly still, leave. Don't wait for the siren. Don't wait for the fish to start running. Don't wait to find out what the dam was built to hold. Because whatever killed Matt and Noah is still there. I know that now. The city didn't tear the dam down after the accident. They didn't drain the river. They didn't close the entire area permanently. They repaired the cage. And this time, They're building it stronger. Alice creeped me out from the beginning. There was nothing I could point to at first. She was polite. She smiled often. She spoke softly and called me honey or sweetheart every few sentences. If someone had met her for 5 minutes, they probably would have described her as a harmless old woman. But something about her made me uncomfortable. Unfortunately, she also paid very well. At the time, I had been working as a handyman for almost 10 years. I had built up a solid list of regular clients around town, mostly through word of mouth. I wasn't the cheapest guy around, but people trusted me. I showed up when I said I would, I cleaned up after myself, and I knew how to handle most jobs without calling 3 other contractors. Plumbing, basic electrical work, painting, landscaping, appliance repairs, damaged siding, small carpentry jobs. I did a little of everything. Business was good enough that I usually had to schedule people weeks in advance. That was why Alice's phone call surprised me. She said she had found my number online and had a few little things around the house that needed attention. A few little things turned out to be a list long enough to keep me busy for several days. Her house sat near the edge of town in a neighborhood I rarely worked in. Most of the houses were old, packed close together, with cracked driveways and overgrown yards. A few properties looked completely abandoned. Alice's place wasn't much better. It was a small one-story house with faded siding, an uneven roofline, dirty windows, and a front porch that leaned just enough to make you notice it. When I arrived to give her an estimate, Alice was waiting at the door. She looked to be somewhere in her 80s. She was very thin, almost fragile looking, with pale skin and bright blue eyes that seemed much sharper than the rest of her. Her white hair had been carefully brushed back, and she wore a clean purple tracksuit that looked strangely new compared with the condition of the house. I later realized she seemed to wear that same purple tracksuit every time I saw her. She walked with a slight limp, slowly, carefully, but her eyes never seemed slow. They followed me everywhere. She gave me a tour of the house while pointing out everything that needed fixing. The kitchen sink, the garbage disposal, a few appliances, damaged siding outside, a dripping faucet, a loose cabinet door, some electrical problems, a section of fence in the backyard. The list kept growing. Eventually, I had to stop her. I'll be honest with you, Alice, I'm pretty booked right now. I have a lot of clients already scheduled, so I don't know how soon I can get to all this. She smiled at me. That's all right, honey. I could give you the names of a couple of other people in the area. Her smile widened. I'd rather have you. I laughed awkwardly. Well, I appreciate that. But some of these jobs might have to wait. Alice looked me directly in the eyes. Whatever price you put on the quote, double it. I thought I'd misheard her. I'm sorry? Double it. She smiled again. I'll pay you cash. I stared at her. Double? Alice, that's really not necessary. I insist. I should have seen that as another warning. Nobody happily pays double without a reason. But I needed the money. I had bills piling up, a truck that needed work, and several expenses I'd been putting off. Double payment could solve a lot of problems. So I agreed. While I finished looking around the house, I started noticing something strange. Alice kept staring at me, not just watching what I was doing. Staring whenever I bent down to inspect a pipe or leaned over a counter, I'd catch her standing several feet away, looking at me, and then she'd lick her lips. Slowly, her lips were thin and dry, and her tongue looked cracked. She would drag it across them while keeping her eyes on me. The first time, I ignored it. The second time, I I became uncomfortable. By the third or fourth time, I started wondering whether I had made a mistake accepting the job. Still, money has a way of making people ignore their instincts. The next morning, I moved a few appointments around and started working at Alice's house. 3 things happened that first day. Any one of them should have been enough to make me leave. The first happened while I was replacing her garbage disposal. I had removed everything underneath the kitchen sink and disconnected the old unit. With the disposal removed, there was an open drain hole above me. I was lying on my back inside the cabinet, looking up through that opening. From where I was positioned, I could see part of the old popcorn ceiling above the sink. I reached to my side for a tool. It couldn't have taken more than 2 seconds. When I rolled onto my back again, Alice's face was looking down at me through the drain. I screamed. Her face filled the opening. Those bright blue eyes stared directly into mine. Her mouth hung slightly open. A thick strand of saliva stretched from the corner of her lips and disappeared below my line of sight. But it was the expression that terrified me. She looked hungry. Not curious, not amused. Hungry, actually starving. Jesus Christ. I jerked upright and smashed the top of my head against the bottom of the sink. Pain flashed across my skull. I scrambled backward out of the cabinet. Alice, what the hell are you doing? I got to my feet. She wasn't there. The kitchen was empty. I stared at the doorway. There was no way she could have moved that quickly. Alice? Nothing. I walked into the living room. She was sitting in an old floral chair, watching a daytime soap opera on a television that looked like it had been manufactured before I was born. She seemed completely relaxed. In here, sweetheart, she said without turning. I stood in the doorway. Did you need something? Alice looked at me. Need something? I saw you in the kitchen. She blinked. I've been right here. You were looking down through the sink. Alice stared at me for a moment. Then she smiled. Wasn't me, honey. I didn't know what to say. She pointed toward the television. I wouldn't miss Mansard Canyon. It's my favorite. She leaned toward me slightly. Although there are far too many whores on that program, I gave an uncomfortable laugh. Right, I started heading back toward the kitchen. One more thing. I stopped. Yes? Her smile was gone. You won't take the Lord's name in vain in my house again. The softness in her voice had disappeared. I remembered shouting Jesus Christ when I'd hit my head. Alice stared at me. Understood? I nodded. Sure, the smile returned immediately. Good boy. I went back to work. I told myself I'd imagined the face. Maybe Alice had looked through the sink and moved faster than I thought. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I'd hit my head harder than I realized. Anything was better than admitting I had no explanation. Later that afternoon, I moved outside to repair damage along the side of the house. A woodpecker had torn several holes into the siding near Alice's bedroom window. I set up my ladder and climbed high enough to reach them. The weather had changed. Thick gray clouds covered the sky, and the air had that heavy feeling that comes right before rain. I actually felt better outside. After the incident in the kitchen, being away from Alice was a relief. For a while, I focused on my work. I filled the holes, smoothed the material, checked the siding, and almost convinced myself that the morning had been nothing more than a strange misunderstanding. Then, something grabbed my ankle. I froze. A hand moved around my calf. Then another. Thin fingers pressed through the gaps in the ladder. I gasped and almost lost my balance. The hands began rubbing my legs. Slowly, possessively. Then I heard a voice. So strong, it came from behind the window below me. My stomach dropped. Give me a taste, I looked down. Strong boy, what the foo? I caught myself before finishing the word. My body twisted so suddenly that the ladder shifted beneath me. For one terrifying second, I thought I was going to fall. I grabbed the rails and pressed myself against them. Then I looked down. Two thin wrists disappeared through Alice's bedroom window. Purple sleeves, her tracksuit. I climbed down as fast as I safely could. By the time my boots hit the ground, the window was closed. The curtains were drawn. I stood there, breathing hard. Then, anger replaced the fear. I marched around the house and went inside. Alice? She was sitting at the kitchen table. A cup of tea steamed in front of her. She was slowly flipping through a tabloid magazine. I stopped walking. There was no way. Absolutely no way. I had come straight down the ladder. For Alice to move from the bedroom window to the kitchen before I got there, she would have needed to move faster than I could run. She looked up. "Everything okay, mister? Handyman?" A faint lipstick mark stained the side of her teacup. I stared at her. Part of me wanted to confront her. Another part wanted to pretend nothing had happened. "Everything's fine," Alice smiled. "Wonderful." I returned outside. I spent the rest of the afternoon checking windows before turning my back to them. The third incident was worse. Late in the day, I was back in the kitchen preparing to work on several appliances. Before doing anything electrical, I needed to shut off power from the breaker box. I assumed it would be in the basement. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about going down there. I was hired to work on the house. Still, because Alice was elderly, I decided to let her know first. I looked in the living room. Empty, kitchen, empty, back patio. Nothing. I even checked the little room Alice had shown me earlier and called her craft room. She wasn't there either. The only place left was her bedroom. I approached the door and knocked gently. "Alice?" No answer. I knocked again. The door wasn't fully latched. It slowly opened under the pressure of my knuckles. I wish it hadn't. The room beyond didn't look like the same house. It was dark. Not ordinary darkness. Thick darkness. The air looked foggy, like cold mist had somehow filled the room. The smell was horrible. Wet wood, mildew, rotting earth. I couldn't clearly see the ceiling. For one insane moment, I thought I could see tiny lights above me, like stars, not decorative lights, actual, distant points of light in a black sky. I stood frozen in the doorway. Then, something on the bed moved. A human shape sat beneath a thick old quilt. The blanket covered it completely. The fabric was covered in symbols I didn't recognize. The shape underneath twisted slowly. A low groan came from beneath the blanket. That was enough. I closed the door. Nope, I was done. Almost. I still needed to finish enough of the job to justify the work I'd already done. So I made myself a deal. I would find the breaker, turn off the electricity, finish the appliance repair, take the money, leave, then I would never return. I found the basement door near the back of the kitchen. When I opened it, a narrow wooden staircase led down into darkness. The smell coming from below was damp and sour. I put one foot on the first step. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" I nearly fell down the stairs. I spun around. Alice stood behind me. But she didn't look like the sweet old woman who had been drinking tea 10 minutes earlier. Her entire body was shaking. Her fists were clenched. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot. Saliva poured from both corners of her mouth. Her face looked animalistic. "Alice, what are you doing? I need to shut off the breaker. You think you can just walk through my house?" I wasn't snooping. "How would you like it?" She stepped closer. "If I came to your house and looked around?" I backed away from the basement stairs. "Alice, I didn't mean anything by it. What if I went into your bedroom?" Her face twisted. "What if I saw where you sleep with your whores?" I stared at her. "I'm sorry." She made a strange choking sound. Then she chuckled. A thick string of saliva hung from her lip. She wiped it away. And just like that, she changed. Her shoulders relaxed. Her face softened. The anger vanished so completely that it felt impossible. "Oh, honey," her voice was gentle again. She smiled at me. I meant to ask earlier, "Would you like some tea?" I stood there, staring at her. That was the moment I decided no amount of money was worth staying in that house. I didn't answer. I grabbed my toolbox. Then I walked out the front door. I didn't stop until I was inside my truck. The next morning, Alice called me early. Her voice sounded perfectly normal. "Hello there, Mr. Handyman. I almost hung up." "Hi, Alice. Thank you so much for all that wonderful work yesterday." I said nothing. "But you silly boy, you forgot to let me pay you." I rubbed my forehead. "That's okay." No, I insist. "Alice, really, I have plenty of cash waiting." She sounded cheerful. "Come by this morning." Every instinct told me not to go. Forget the payment. Forget Alice. Forget that house. But then I thought about the amount of money, double my normal rate. Cash, I told myself I only needed to walk inside, take the payment, and leave. 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I drove back. Alice's house looked different in daylight, more abandoned. The grass seemed taller than I'd remembered. The windows were so dirty I couldn't see through most of them. I walked onto the porch and knocked. No answer. I knocked again. "Alice?" I touched the door. It opened, just like the bedroom door had the day before. "Alice?" "Nothing." I stepped inside. "It's me. I came by for the payment." Silence. I walked through the living room. Empty. The television was off. The kitchen was empty, too. No tea. No newspaper. No Alice. I checked the hallway. Alice? Still nothing. Finally, I decided to leave. The money wasn't worth searching the entire house. I turned toward the front door. Then I saw the basement. The door was open. A black rectangle waited at the end of the hallway. I stopped. Absolutely not. I started toward the front door. Then another thought entered my mind. What if Alice had fallen? She was in her 80s. She had a limp. The basement stairs were steep and unstable. Maybe she had gone down there and gotten hurt. I hated the woman at that point. I was afraid of her. But I couldn't leave an elderly person injured in a basement because I was scared. I stood there for almost a minute, arguing with myself. Then I grabbed the flashlight from my toolbox. "Alice?" I approached the stairs. "Are you down there?" No answer. I started descending. Every step creaked. The basement had a dirt floor. Small, filthy windows near the ceiling allowed weak daylight inside. Boxes were everywhere, hundreds of them. Cardboard boxes, old wooden trunks, broken furniture, stacks of magazines, clothes, rusting tools, objects I couldn't identify. Cobwebs hung between everything. Narrow paths ran through the piles, forming little tunnels deeper into the basement. "Alice?" My voice sounded wrong down there. Smaller, the deeper I walked, the worse the air became. Dust coated my clothes. Webs stuck to my face. The basement seemed much larger than the house above it. That shouldn't have been possible. I turned another corner. Then, another. The weak daylight behind me disappeared. Soon I was moving through what felt like a maze. That was when the fog returned. The same strange haze I had seen inside Alice's bedroom. It gathered between the boxes. I looked upward. Through the cobwebs and exposed wires, I could see darkness and tiny stars. I stopped. That ceiling was supposed to be less than 8 feet above me. But what I saw looked endless. My chest tightened. The air became heavy. Every breath took effort. I should have turned around. Then I heard something. A wet grinding noise. I held still. It came again. Grinding, chewing, something was eating. "Alice?" The sound stopped. I almost ran. Then I heard it again. Closer, I followed the noise around a stack of rotting boxes. The narrow path opened into a small clearing. The floor there was muddy. Bones were scattered everywhere, hundreds of them. Some were small, others were not. Strips of dried meat clung to several. I couldn't tell if they were animal bones. I didn't want to know. In the center of the space was a hole, roughly the size of a manhole, perfectly black. It looked less like a hole in the ground and more like an opening into something that wasn't supposed to be there. Black vapor drifted upward from it. I stared. Then I heard screams, faint, distant, coming from somewhere below. I couldn't move. My mind kept trying to explain what I was seeing. An old well, a ventilation shaft, an animal den. Anything, then a hand came out. Small, thin, pale, 5 fingers gripped the muddy edge. Another hand appeared. A naked body slowly pulled itself from the darkness. Alice. Except it wasn't the Alice I knew. Her body was covered in a thick black substance that looked somewhere between oil and milk. It ran from her skin in slow streams. Her arms seemed longer than they should have been. Her fingers stretched across the mud. Her mouth opened. "I want a bite, Mr. Handyman." My legs refused to move. Alice dragged herself farther out of the pit. She looked into my eyes. Then she laughed. The sound was terrible. Part pleasure, part pain, part hunger. "Let me eat, honey," she crawled toward me. "Let me eat." That broke whatever spell had frozen me. I turned and ran. One of her hands swept behind my ankle and missed by inches. I crashed into a stack of boxes. They fell around me. Something shattered. I didn't stop. I ran through the maze. Branches of cobwebs broke across my face. Boxes tore my shirt. I could hear Alice moving behind me. Fast, far too fast. Sometimes I heard crawling. Sometimes footsteps. Sometimes laughter. "Come back, honey." I found the stairs. I took them 2 at a time. Halfway up, I heard something hit the bottom step behind me. I didn't look back. I burst through the basement door, across the kitchen, through the living room. The front door seemed impossibly far away. Then I heard Alice behind me. Calm again. Sweet, normal, "Your money's on the kitchen table, Mr. Handyman." I reached the door, opened it, ran outside. I was in my truck before I heard the house door slam behind me. I drove away so fast, I nearly clipped another car pulling onto the main road. I never collected the money. For the next several days, I barely slept. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw Alice climbing out of that hole. I saw those hands, that black substance, the bones, the impossible stars above the basement. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Alice was mentally ill. Maybe someone else had been living in the house. Maybe I'd breathed in mold or some chemical that caused hallucinations. None of it explained everything. After about a week, I contacted a friend of mine who worked as a private investigator. His name was Toom. And yes, that really was his name. I didn't tell him every detail. I just told him I had worked for a strange elderly woman named Alice and wanted to know more about her. I gave him the address. He laughed at first. Then he agreed to look into it. A few days later, he called. "Buddy," his tone immediately made me nervous. "What? Where exactly did you say you met this woman?" "At the house." "The address you gave me?" Yes, there was a pause. "Tom, what?" He sighed. "That house is abandoned." I sat up. "What do you mean?" "I mean abandoned. Empty, has been for years." "No, yes, I was there 2 days in a row. Then you were somewhere else." "I gave you the address." "I know." He continued. "I checked the property records, talked to people nearby. Nobody named Alice lives there." My mouth went dry. "Did you go inside?" "No, place is locked up. But I looked through every window I could reach. And dust, trash, dead mice, empty rooms." I couldn't speak. He laughed nervously. "What did you say you saw there again?" I didn't answer. And more importantly, what the hell have you been smoking? After the call ended, I sat alone for a long time. Eventually, I drove past Alice's street. I didn't stop. I slowed down just enough to look. The house was there. But it didn't look like the house I remembered. The windows were boarded in places. The yard was badly overgrown. Part of the porch had collapsed. There was no purple curtain in the bedroom window, no television glow, no sign that anyone had lived there recently. I kept driving. I have never gone back. I don't know what Alice was. Maybe she was never human. Maybe she was once human and became something else. Maybe the house wasn't really a house. Maybe that basement wasn't really beneath it. I don't know. The only thing I know for certain is what I experienced. I know what grabbed my legs through that window. I know what looked at me through the sink. I know what crawled from that black hole. And I know how hungry it was. So if you ever meet an old woman named Alice, especially one with bright blue eyes and a purple tracksuit, pay attention to your instincts. If she offers you too much money, walk away. If you catch her staring at you and licking her lips, don't make excuses for it. And if she tells you not to go into the basement, take that as the one piece of advice from her you should actually follow. Because I still don't know where Alice is. I don't know whether she stays in one house or moves from place to place. I don't know how many empty homes might look occupied when she decides to use them. Maybe she creates something around herself. A house. A room. A nest. Somewhere she can sit in a purple tracksuit, drink tea, read tabloids, complain about soap operas, and wait for someone useful to knock on the door. A plumber, an electrician, a delivery driver, a handyman. Someone who thinks the money is too good to refuse. Someone who ignores that uncomfortable feeling in their stomach because they need the cash. Someone like me. And if you ever become that person, remember this. Whatever she offers you, it isn't worth finding out what she keeps in the basement. Because I don't think Alice hired me to repair her house. Looking back, I'm not convinced anything in that house actually needed fixing. I think she invited me inside for another reason. And every time I remember the way she stared at me during that first visit, slowly dragging her cracked tongue across her lips, I understand what that reason was. She wasn't looking at a handyman. She was looking at dinner. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. Having worked in the medical field for 15 years, I used to believe I had seen almost everything a person reasonably could. I had treated people who came into my office convinced they were dying from something minor, and I had treated people who seemed perfectly calm while dealing with illnesses that could actually kill them. I had seen panic attacks, drug withdrawals, strange infections, severe allergic reactions, psychotic episodes, neurological problems, and injuries that still made me uncomfortable to remember. There were cases that stayed with me for weeks. A few stayed with me for years. But until that particular day, I had always believed that no matter how disturbing or unusual something appeared, there would eventually be a scientific explanation for it. There had to be. That was the foundation of everything I had been taught. Observe the symptoms, take the history, run the tests, rule things out, narrow down the possibilities. Eventually, the body tells you what is wrong. That was what I believed. Looking back now, I sometimes wish I had been a little less certain. Maybe it would have been smarter to accept that there are things we do not understand yet, things that do not fit neatly into the medical knowledge we have collected and organized over the years. Maybe if I had accepted that possibility sooner, I would have reacted differently. Maybe I would have recognized what was sitting in front of me. And maybe I would not be in the situation I am in now. Before all of this happened, I had a fairly good reputation in town. Some people called me the Gentle Doctor. I always found the nickname a little embarrassing, but I understood why they used it. A lot of my patients were young adults who had recently stopped seeing their pediatricians. Parents often recommended me when their children were moving away from childhood health care and entering that strange period where they were expected to handle appointments, medication, insurance, and medical decisions on their own. Some of them were 18 or 19 years old and still looked terrified just sitting in an examination room without a parent beside them. I understood that. Doctors can be intimidating even when they are trying not to be. So I made a point of explaining everything before I did it. I never touched a patient unexpectedly. I told them why I was asking certain questions. If they needed a break, they got one. Over the years, I also became comfortable treating patients who had psychiatric conditions, developmental disabilities, severe anxiety, sensory problems, or a history of trauma. I learned quickly that a routine appointment for one patient could be an overwhelming experience for another. Bright lights, cold equipment, being asked to remove clothing, a stranger touching your body, questions about drugs, sex, mental health, family, and other private things. There were many reasons a person might sit shaking in a doctor's office. That was why, when I first met the young man I will call Theo, I did not immediately think anything was seriously wrong, at least not anything supernatural. He was already sitting in the examination room when I entered. He had chosen the nylon chair in the far corner instead of sitting on the examination table. The first thing I noticed was how thin he looked. He had the narrow build of someone who had either lost weight recently or had never carried much to begin with. His shoulders seemed almost too small beneath the dark hoodie he was wearing. His hair was red and messy, hanging down over his forehead in uneven strands. The whites of his eyes were heavily bloodshot, not the mild redness you sometimes see after a bad night's sleep. They looked strained. His skin was pale in some places and blotchy in others. The visible parts of his cheeks had patches of irritated red skin, which immediately made me think of some kind of rash or inflammatory condition. But most of his face and neck were hidden. The hood was pulled forward, almost as though he were trying to disappear inside it. His hands were tucked into the sleeves. His knees kept moving, not bouncing casually. Shaking, he looked like he wanted to run. I closed the door behind me gently. "Hi, Theo. I'm Dr. Mercer. That is not my real name either." I smiled, but did not move toward him. "I've looked over the information you gave at intake. Before we do anything, I just want to talk for a few minutes." He gave me a short nod. I did not offer my hand. Years earlier, I might have done it automatically. By that point in my career, I knew better. Some patients hated unexpected physical contact. Others interpreted a handshake as pressure rather than friendliness. Theo definitely did not look like he wanted to be touched. I sat on the stool across from him. "How are you feeling right now?" He shrugged. His eyes stayed low. "Okay." His voice was quiet and rough. "You seem a little uncomfortable." Another shrug. "I don't like doctors. That is more common than you think." He gave no response. I glanced again at the hoodie. According to the intake form, he had complained of fatigue, skin irritation, dizziness, and an unusual sensation in his chest. The information was vague. Too vague, really, when the nurse had tried to get more detail. Theo apparently told her he would rather speak directly with the doctor. I had assumed he might be embarrassed, That happened often enough. I'd normally have you change into a gown so I can do a proper examination, I told him. If you'd like, I can step outside while you change. His entire body stiffened. No, the answer came immediately. That's fine. The hoodie stays on. I paused. That might make parts of the exam difficult. It stays on. There was fear behind the words, not stubbornness. Fear. I decided not to push. All right, we can work around it. His shoulders dropped slightly. You can keep the hoodie on over the gown if that makes you more comfortable. I may need you to lift it a little so I can listen to your heart and check certain things. Nothing happens without you agreeing first. He nodded. I watched him carefully. Before we do any examination, though, we can just talk. Another nod. If you want to stop at any point, say so. Okay, I waited. He did not volunteer anything. So tell me what's been happening. Theo rubbed his hands together inside his sleeves. I don't know. You mentioned dizziness. Sometimes any fainting? No. Chest pain? He hesitated. Not exactly. Shortness of breath? Sometimes. When? I don't know. His answers were becoming shorter. I shifted direction. What about the rash? His eyes immediately flicked toward me. That reaction confirmed that there was more going on beneath the hood. I softened my voice. I can see some irritation on your face. I'm not asking you to show me anything yet. I just want to understand how long you've had it. A few days. Is it painful? He swallowed. A little. Itchy? No. Any fever? I don't think so. Have you taken your temperature? No. I noticed his jaw tightening. His teeth seemed to be chattering slightly. At first, I assumed anxiety. Then I wondered if he was actually cold. The room was not cold. In fact, it was warmer than I usually preferred because an older patient earlier that morning had complained about the air conditioning. Are you cold? He looked at me. Kind of. I made a note. I asked him about medications. Nothing regular. Recent illness. No. Travel. No. Drugs. He denied them. Alcohol, rarely. New foods, soaps, detergents, medications, supplements, sexual partners, animal exposure. Nothing. I was beginning to wonder if the medical symptoms were secondary to something psychiatric. Then I asked about home. Do you live alone? With my mom and stepdad. Are they aware you're here? My stepdad is. Did he drive you? Theo nodded. He's in the parking lot. I waited a moment. Would it help if he came inside? Theo's reaction surprised me. His head snapped up. No. His breathing changed. Faster. All right. He doesn't have to. He won't come in. That is completely fine. He just wants to make sure. Theo stopped. His lips pressed together. Make sure what? He shook his head. Nothing. I watched him for several seconds. His jaw was clenched again. We haven't been seeing eye to eye lately. Something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. At the time, though, I interpreted that discomfort through the normal possibilities. Family conflict. Substance abuse. A controlling parent. Maybe the stepfather suspected Theo was using drugs and had forced him into the appointment. Maybe Theo had been hurting himself. Maybe the skin marks were related to that. My mind stayed inside familiar territory. That was my mistake. I leaned back slightly. I want to remind you of something important. You're an adult. Your stepfather cannot make medical decisions for you. You have to consent to anything we do here. Theo nodded. You understand that? Yes, his teeth ground together. I could actually hear it. I considered ending the appointment. Not because I wanted to refuse him treatment, but because he seemed so distressed that I worried continuing might do more harm than good. There is another option, I said. If today feels like too much, we can stop and reschedule. You could return with someone you trust, or we could arrange for you to speak with someone from behavioral health first. His eyes widened. No, Theo, that's not a punishment. I'm just saying, no he leaned forward. His voice came out almost like a breath. "Just check my heart." That caught my attention. Not his rash, not his dizziness, his heart. I studied him. "Why your heart?" He looked away. "I don't know. You asked very specifically. I just need you to check it." There was desperation in his voice now. "Please, I should have asked more questions." Instead, I agreed. "All right." I washed my hands and prepared the stethoscope. As soon as I moved closer, Theo's face changed. His nose wrinkled. He turned his head. "What?" I stopped. He swallowed hard. "What is that smell?" "What smell?" He gagged. For a second, I thought he was going to vomit. I stepped back. "Theo, that smell." I glanced around the room. There was nothing unusual. Disinfectant, paper from the examination table. Latex, the faint medicinal smell most clinics have. Then I remembered my perfume. I wore a very mild rose fragrance, usually only a small amount. I had worn it for years without any patient reacting strongly. "Is it perfume?" He covered his mouth. "I don't know. Are you having trouble breathing?" He shook his head. Then he suddenly retched. The movement was violent enough that his hood slipped down. That was when I saw his neck. Everything in me shifted from concern to alarm. There were 2 wounds. They sat low on the side of his neck. 2 dark punctures separated by a small amount of intact skin. The area around them was badly inflamed. Purple veins stretched outward beneath the skin. The edges of the wounds were yellow and crusted. There was dried blood around both holes. I stared at them. My first thought was infection. My second was animal bite, possibly snake, although the location was strange. "Theo, how did you get those?" He immediately pulled the hood back up. "I don't know." "You don't know?" "No, those wounds need to be examined." He shook his head. "Theo, they look infected." "No, an infection near the neck can become serious very quickly." He stared at the floor. I suddenly became aware that he was still reacting to the perfume. I was worried it might be aggravating whatever condition he had. "Stay here." His head lifted. "Where are you going?" "To wash the perfume off. I'll be right back." I stepped into the nearest bathroom. I locked the door behind me. I still remember standing at the sink and looking at my reflection. For the first time during the appointment, I looked frightened. I scrubbed my wrists, then my neck, then behind my ears. Anywhere I had applied perfume, my pulse was racing. I tried to calm myself by going over ordinary explanations. Snake bite, spider bite, human bite. Infected puncture wounds, sepsis, drug use, some strange allergic or neurological response. There were possibilities. There were always possibilities. I dried my hands and looked at myself again. "You're a doctor," I whispered. It sounds ridiculous now, but I needed to hear it. I returned to the room. Theo was exactly where I had left him, hood up, hands hidden. Shaking, I pulled the stool closer. "Let's check your heart." He nodded. I placed the earpieces of the stethoscope in my ears. "Lift the sweatshirt slightly." He hesitated. Then he raised it just enough for me to place the diaphragm against his chest. His skin was freezing. I nearly pulled my hand away. Not cool, not clammy. Cold. The kind of cold you feel when touching a metal railing outside in winter. My fingers stayed against his side for a moment. "Theo, are you feeling extremely cold?" Yes, I moved the stethoscope. I listened. Nothing. I adjusted it. Nothing. I moved slightly left, then lower, then higher. I could hear movement from the room, his breathing, the faint sound of fabric, my own pulse inside my ears. But from his chest, there was no heartbeat. I told myself I had positioned the stethoscope badly. It happens. Clothing can interfere. An anxious patient can make things awkward. I repositioned it. Still nothing. I tried again. Theo was watching my face now. I realized that he knew exactly what I was doing. He was waiting for my reaction. Sometimes it can take a second to find the clearest point, I said. It was a stupid thing to say. I had listened to thousands of hearts. I knew where a heart should be. I moved the diaphragm again. Silence. Not weak. Not irregular. Absent, my own heartbeat began pounding so loudly that I had trouble separating it from everything else. I held my breath. Theo held his. There was nothing inside his chest. Nothing. Just the hollow sound of movement through tissue and empty ribs. I stared at him. His skin beneath my hand felt even colder now. It was strange. The cold seemed to spread into my fingers. Then my palm. Then my wrist. It did not feel like I was simply touching something cold. It felt as though warmth was being pulled out of me. The way sunlight can warm your skin, except reversed. I removed my hand. For the first time in 15 years of medicine, my mind had no reasonable explanation ready. I wondered if I was hallucinating. I wondered if I was having some kind of neurological event. I wondered if the equipment was broken. But Theo was staring at me, and the expression on his face told me something terrible. He already knew. He knew what I had heard, or rather, what I had not heard. Neither of us spoke. The silence became unbearable. I think that was the moment everything changed. Until then, we could both pretend. He was a patient. I was his doctor. There was a rash. There were wounds. There was some strange medical condition. But my silence became an answer. And Theo understood it. His shaking stopped. Completely, that frightened me more than anything else. For the first time since I entered the room, he was perfectly still. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. His lips parted. I saw his teeth. His incisors were longer than they should have been. Not dramatically. Not like something from a cheap movie. But wrong enough. Sharp enough. I had barely enough time to register that detail. Then he moved. I do not remember falling. One moment I was beside him. The next, my back struck the floor. Pain exploded through my shoulder. Theo was on top of me. His face no longer looked frightened. He looked starving. His mouth went to my neck. The first bite felt like 2 hot needles. Then came pressure. Then tearing. I tried to scream. Nothing came out properly. His hand was crushing my throat. I felt tissue tear. I knew exactly what was happening anatomically. That may have been the worst part. I knew where his mouth was. The carotid. Then the jugular. I knew how much blood should have been leaving my body. I knew what arterial bleeding should look like. But my blood did not spray across the room the way it should have. It was being pulled into him. Siphoned, the sensation was horrifying. There was suction. Strong, rhythmic pressure. Like some mechanism inside his mouth or throat was drawing the blood from me. I clawed at his face. My fingers caught his cheek. I felt skin, acne, hair, normal human features. That somehow made it worse. I tried to push him away. He was much stronger than his body suggested. That thin, shaking young man pinned me down like I weighed nothing. My legs kicked against the floor. I tried to hit him with a stethoscope. I tried to reach the counter. Anything, but my strength was disappearing too quickly. My vision started narrowing. The ceiling above me seemed to move farther away. The lights blurred. I remember thinking that this was what blood loss felt like. Cold, weakness, confusion, the body's desperate attempt to protect the brain. I had explained those symptoms to patients before. Now I was experiencing every one of them. I tried to scream again. Only a wet sound came out. Then, the room went black. I do not know how long I was unconscious. When I woke up, there were people around me. Someone was pressing something against my neck. Someone else was shouting. I tried to speak and produced only a bloody gurgle. Then I lost consciousness again. I woke later in the hospital. There were stitches in my neck, tubes, bandages, pain everywhere. The damage to my throat had been severe. My vocal cords were injured. My larynx had been damaged. I had lost a dangerous amount of blood. The surgeons told me I was lucky to be alive. Lucky, that word still makes me laugh sometimes, although laughing hurts. The official explanation was that a mentally unstable patient had attacked me during an acute psychiatric episode. He had bitten me, mauled my throat, then fled. The police searched for him. They interviewed his family. His stepfather claimed Theo had been behaving strangely for days. According to him, Theo had become aggressive. Confused, paranoid, that explanation made everyone comfortable. A troubled young man suffered a psychotic break and attacked a doctor. Terrible, yes, but understandable. Human, the staff at my clinic still talk about it. They lower their voices when they think I am nearby. Sometimes I hear fragments. The patient who snapped. The doctor who almost died. The mentally ill kid. The violent attack. That is the story everyone accepts. I let them. I have never told my colleagues that Theo had no heartbeat. I have never told the police how cold his skin was. I never told anyone about the wounds in his neck, or the way he reacted to the rose perfume, or those teeth. Most importantly, I never told them what happened to my blood. Because what could I say? That he drank it? That it seemed to disappear into him faster than should have been physically possible? They would decide the blood loss and trauma had confused my memory. Maybe they already assumed that. I cannot blame them. Before this happened, I would have thought the same thing. So, I stay quiet. My voice has improved, though it still sounds damaged. The doctors say there's a chance it may eventually recover almost completely. When it does, I will tell the same story everyone else tells. A disturbed patient attacked me. An occupational hazard. A terrible but explainable event. I will return to work. I will see patients. I will smile. I will listen to their lungs. I will take their blood pressure. And I will pretend that I still believe the human body always follows the rules. The news occasionally mentions Theo. They use words like dangerous, mentally unstable, missing, and violent. They tell people to contact authorities if they see him. I switch the television off whenever his picture appears. It is easier that way. The public explanation is better. People need to believe they are safe from things like him. They need to believe there are hospitals, police officers, medications, diagnoses, and explanations for every dangerous thing that exists in the world. Maybe that belief matters. Maybe people need it. I used to. Now I know better. And now, unfortunately, so do you. You are reading this because I needed to tell someone the truth. I needed there to be at least one place where the real version existed. No name, no clinic, no town, nothing that could identify me. Just the truth. Because keeping it entirely inside my head was becoming unbearable. There is one final thing I have not mentioned. Something I have not told the police, or my colleagues, or even the doctors treating me. Recovery from blood loss is supposed to take time. I know that better than most. After an injury like mine, fatigue is normal. Weakness is normal. Changes in appetite are normal. So are dizziness, sleep problems, and strange sensations while the nerves heal. Those explanations worked for a while. Then, I started noticing other things. My body temperature has been lower than it used to be. Not dangerously low, just enough to make nurses repeat the measurement. My resting pulse has slowed. Some days it becomes difficult to find at all, Food does not taste the same anymore. Certain smells make me nauseous, especially garlic, although I know how ridiculous that sounds. Flowers bother me too. Rose perfume is the worst. I stopped wearing it. Then there are the dreams. I dream about the examination room. Theo sits in the corner. He never attacks me in the dreams. He only watches. Sometimes he smiles. Sometimes he asks whether I can hear it yet. I always wake before I can answer. For weeks, I told myself it was trauma. Post-traumatic stress. Nightmares after an assault are hardly unusual. Then something happened 3 nights ago. I cut my finger while preparing dinner, a very small cut. Normally, I would have rinsed it, covered it, and forgotten about it. Instead, I stood at the kitchen counter staring at the blood. There was only one drop, bright red. I could smell it, not metaphorically. Actually, smell it, coppery, warm, strangely sweet. I leaned closer without realizing I was doing it, and for one terrible second, I wanted to taste it. I pulled my hand away so quickly that I knocked a glass onto the floor. I stood there shaking for nearly 10 minutes. The next morning, I made an appointment with my own doctor. I told him I was tired. I told him my appetite had changed. I told him I was struggling with anxiety. I told him everything except the truth. He ordered blood work. When the nurse tried to take the sample, she had trouble finding a vein. She joked that I must be dehydrated. Eventually, she managed. I watched the tube fill. I should not have watched. The smell hit me again. That same warm, metallic scent. For a moment, I had to grip the edge of the chair. The nurse asked if I was going to faint. I told her yes. That was easier. These days, I lie to my own doctor quite a lot. I tell him I am recovering. I tell him my symptoms are improving. I tell him the strange sensations are probably stress. He agrees. Maybe he needs to. Maybe I do too. But every night before bed, I put 2 fingers against my neck and count. 1, 2, 3. Sometimes there is a pulse. Sometimes I wait far longer than I should before feeling anything. And sometimes, when the house is completely quiet and I hold my breath, I cannot feel one at all. I couldn't wait for 6 o'clock. I must have checked the clock on the living room wall every 3 or 4 minutes that afternoon. It felt like the hands were barely moving. Every time I looked away and checked again, I was convinced at least 10 minutes had passed, only to discover it had been 2. Halloween had always been my favorite day of the year, and back then, when I was a kid, it felt almost magical. The entire neighborhood changed for one night. Ordinary houses became graveyards, porches were covered in fake spider webs, plastic skeletons hung from trees, and glowing pumpkins stared out from windows. But the best part was that Jamie and I always spent Halloween together. Jamie had been my best friend for years. We went to the same school, lived only a few streets apart, and did almost everything together. We both loved horror movies, ghost stories, costumes, and anything that scared us just enough to make us laugh afterward. So, when the clock finally reached 6, I practically jumped out of my chair. I grabbed the orange plastic pumpkin bucket I'd left beside the sofa, picked up the plastic scythe that went with my Grim Reaper costume, and headed straight for the front door. My mother was standing in the kitchen when she saw me rushing past. "Charlie," I stopped with my hand already on the door. "Have fun," she said, "but you and Jamie stay together. And I want you home by 8. Yeah, Mom, Charlie," I turned around. 8, I know. She gave me that look mothers give when they already know you're only half listening. Then she smiled. Have fun. I was out the door before she could say anything else. The air outside was cold enough that I could see a little of my breath. Kids were already everywhere. Some were running from house to house while their parents followed behind them. Others were walking in groups, comparing costumes and showing each other how much candy they'd already collected. I remember hearing laughter from every direction. Someone had a speaker, playing creepy music from their porch. Fake ghosts hung from trees and moved whenever the wind blew. Somewhere farther down the street, a motion-activated witch kept screaming every time someone walked past it. Everything felt perfect. Jamie's house was only a few minutes away. When I reached it, I stopped in front of the faded light blue door and immediately heard shouting from inside. His parents were arguing again. They'd been doing that a lot during the previous few months. At first, Jamie never talked about it. Whenever I asked him why his parents were always angry at each other, he'd change the subject. Eventually, he told me that his father had lost his job and things had become difficult at home. After that, the arguments seemed to get worse. There had been other things, too. Bruises. I'd noticed them on Jamie more than once. One time, he'd had a dark bruise on his arm. Another time, there was one along his ribs that I noticed when his shirt lifted during gym class. Teachers noticed them, too. Whenever one of them asked what had happened or offered to help him, Jamie always had an excuse. He'd fallen from the swings. He'd tripped while playing football. He'd crashed his bicycle. It was always something. At that age, I didn't fully understand what might have been happening inside his house. I knew his father had a temper, but I didn't understand how bad things really were. Standing outside their house that Halloween night, listening to his parents screaming at each other through the walls, I almost considered leaving. Then I knocked. The arguing suddenly became quieter. A few seconds later, Jamie opened the door. The first thing I noticed was the bruise under his left eye. It looked fresh, purple around the edges, darker toward the center. I stared at it for a second too long, because Jamie quickly looked away. Then I noticed his costume. He had one of those cheap plastic fake knives attached to his head. A dark cap helped hide the band holding it in place. Fake blood had been smeared down both sides of his face. Instead of a Halloween candy bucket, he was carrying a regular plastic shopping bag. He looked at my Grim Reaper costume, then down at his own. "I know," he said quietly. "It's not the best." I didn't say anything. Ever since Dad lost his job, we haven't had as much money, and no, I interrupted. "It's great." He looked at me. "Seriously, I like it." For the first time that evening, he smiled. Not a big smile, just enough. Thanks, neither of us mentioned the bruise. We left his house and started walking our usual Halloween route. The first house we visited belonged to one of our teachers. Jamie and I both had a harmless childhood crush on her. She was young, friendly, and one of those teachers who somehow made even boring lessons feel enjoyable. Her porch was decorated with orange lights and small plastic pumpkins. Jamie rang the bell. A moment later, the door opened. "Trick or treat." We shouted together. Our teacher smiled. She looked slightly pale and her eyes seemed tired, but she was carrying a huge bowl filled with candy. "Oh, look at you two." She complimented my Grim Reaper costume and laughed at Jamie's fake knife. Then she lowered the candy bowl and let us each choose a few pieces. Normally, Jamie would have immediately searched for chocolate, but instead, he looked past her into the house. "How's Buddy?" he asked. The smile disappeared from our teacher's face. Buddy was her dog. He was a big, gentle old dog we'd known for years. Sometimes we'd see our teacher walking him in the park, and she always let us pet him. I noticed her eyes becoming wet. Oh, boys, her voice changed. Buddy was very old. Yesterday, he went up to heaven to join his other doggy friends. Jamie stared at her. I looked down at my candy bucket. I actually felt sad. We both loved Buddy. Then, for only a second, I looked at Jamie again. I thought I saw him smile, not a happy smile. It was small and strange, almost cruel. The moment I noticed it, it disappeared. I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Our teacher told us not to be too sad and reminded us that Buddy had lived a long, happy life. Now go enjoy your Halloween. We thanked her and walked away. For the next few houses, Jamie seemed normal again. We collected candy. We joked about costumes. He laughed when a motion-activated skeleton scared me, even though I'd seen it coming. I started to forget about the strange expression I'd seen at our teacher's house. Then we reached Mrs. Miller's street. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Mrs. Miller. She was an old woman who seemed to hate almost everyone, but children especially. She complained about noise. She complained about bicycles. She complained about kids walking across the edge of her lawn. Once she'd yelled at Jamie and me because a ball had rolled into her garden. On Halloween, almost every child skipped her house. Her porch was completely dark. No pumpkins, no decorations, no candy bowl, nothing. I automatically started walking past. Jamie stopped. Hey, I looked back. He was standing at the bottom of Mrs. Miller's steps. Come on, I said. He didn't move. Jamie, he looked at the house. Then he walked straight up the steps. What are you doing? Before I could stop him, he pressed the doorbell. I froze. For several seconds, nothing happened. The street behind us was noisy, but standing on that porch, everything suddenly felt strangely quiet. I whispered, "Let's go." Jamie ignored me. Then the front door flew open. Mrs. Miller stood there staring at him. I couldn't hear exactly what Jamie said at first. He leaned toward her and spoke quietly. Her face changed instantly. She screamed. Not the annoyed yelling we'd heard from her before. This was different. She completely lost control. "You little bastard." People on the sidewalk turned toward us. Jamie started laughing. Mrs. Miller screamed something else, disappeared into her house, and returned seconds later holding whatever she'd managed to grab. The first thing she threw missed us. Then came something else, a small decoration. Then another object. I don't even remember what half of it was. I grabbed Jamie's arm. "Run." He refused to move. He was laughing directly at her. I had to drag him down the steps while Mrs. Miller continued screaming after us. We didn't stop until we'd reached the other end of the street. I finally let go of him. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Jamie was still smiling. "What? What were you saying to her?" His smile disappeared. I could feel myself getting angry. "Have you lost your mind?" She was going crazy. Jamie looked down. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. "I'm sorry, Charlie. I was still angry, but his voice sounded different now. Sad. You know, things are really hard at home," he said. "Sometimes I don't know what's gotten into me." That anger disappeared almost immediately. Jamie was my best friend. I knew something was wrong at his house. I knew he was struggling. So instead of yelling again, I stepped forward and hugged him. "It's okay." He didn't hug me back immediately. Then I felt his arms around me. "Just don't do that again," I said. "I won't." "Promise?" "Promise." We continued trick-or-treating. For another 20 minutes or so, everything seemed normal. Jamie made jokes again. We compared how much candy we'd collected. At one house, someone dressed as a zombie jumped out from behind a hedge and scared both of us so badly that we nearly dropped our bags. I remember thinking the weird part of the night was over. I was wrong. Eventually, we reached Agnes's house. Agnes was probably the kindest elderly woman in our neighborhood. Unlike Mrs. Miller, She loved children. She always remembered people's names. She baked cookies for neighbors during Christmas and sometimes gave kids lemonade during the summer. But a few weeks before Halloween, something terrible had happened to her family. Her grandson, Oliver, had drowned. He was her only grandson. Everybody in the neighborhood knew about it. I'd seen Agnes a few times afterward and expected her to become withdrawn or angry. Instead, she seemed even kinder. It was almost as though losing Oliver had made her determined to treat every child she met with as much warmth as possible. Her house had small Halloween decorations along the walkway. Nothing scary, just pumpkins and friendly-looking ghosts. I pressed the doorbell. Agnes answered almost immediately. When she saw us, she smiled. "Oh, look at you boys." I lifted my scythe dramatically. "Trick or," Jamie interrupted me. "You don't have to be afraid, Agnes." I turned toward him. His face had changed again. That same little smile I'd seen at our teacher's house was back. Agnes stared at him. Jamie continued. "Soon you'll be playing hide and seek with Oliver." For a second, I couldn't understand what he'd said. Then, the meaning hit me. Everything inside me went cold. Agnes's face collapsed. I can't think of a better way to describe it. It was as if something inside her broke. She stared at Jamie without saying anything. Then she slowly closed the door. I heard it lock. I looked at Jamie. He was smiling. I hit him. There was no warning. I just lunged at him. We fell onto the grass beside the walkway. He hit me back. I punched him again. He grabbed my costume and pulled me toward him. At some point, my nose started bleeding. The fake blood on Jamie's face mixed with real blood from a cut near his mouth. We rolled across the grass until I finally pushed him away. I stood up, shaking. "We're done." Jamie remained on the ground. "I never want to see you again." He slowly sat up. For a moment, he stared at me. Then, he lowered his head and chuckled. That sound frightened me more than the fight had. "You know, Charlie." I wiped blood from beneath my nose. "What?" He raised his eyes. "I wanted to take care of your little sister afterward." I stared at him. "But after this," he continued, "I'm going to have to think about it." I didn't understand what he meant. I didn't have a little sister. I didn't even have any siblings. "What are you talking about?" Jamie smiled again. I suddenly didn't want an answer. I picked up my scythe and candy bucket and walked away. He didn't follow me. The entire walk home, I kept thinking about what he'd said to Agnes. I was furious. But underneath that anger, there was something else. Fear. Jamie had felt different that night. Not just angry, not just upset because of problems at home. Different. When I reached my house, my mother saw my bloody nose immediately. "Oh my God, Charlie, what happened?" "Nothing. That's not nothing. I don't want to talk about it." She tried asking me again, but I refused. Eventually, she cleaned the blood from my face and let me go upstairs. I dumped my candy onto the floor and barely touched it. For the first time in my life, Halloween didn't feel exciting anymore. I lay awake thinking about Jamie. Part of me wanted to call him. Another part never wanted to see him again. I kept hearing his voice. "Soon you'll be playing hide and seek with Oliver." Then, the other sentence. "I wanted to take care of your little sister afterward." I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I expected Jamie to come to school. He didn't. I thought maybe his parents had kept him home because of the fight. He wasn't there the next day either. Or the day after that. I asked a few classmates if they'd heard from him. Nobody had. I considered walking to his house, but every time I thought about doing it, I remembered the strange smile on his face, so I stayed away. Then, a few days later, my mother called me downstairs. Her voice sounded strange. "Charlie?" I was in my room. "Yeah? Come down here, sweetheart." When I reached the living room, she was sitting on the sofa. Her face was pale. She told me to sit beside her. I immediately knew something terrible had happened. "You know Jamie?" I nodded. She took a breath. "I'm so sorry." She struggled to continue. "Jamie and his mother," her voice broke. I remember staring at her, waiting. "His father killed them." I didn't understand at first. The words were simple, but my mind refused to process them. "What?" "It happened at their house. The story was in the newspapers. Apparently, Jamie's father had attacked his wife with an axe. He'd nearly cut her head off. Then, he'd killed Jamie with a kitchen knife. The knife had been driven into Jamie's head. When I heard that detail, I felt sick. All I could see was Jamie standing at his front door on Halloween night, the fake knife attached to his head, the cheap cap holding it in place, the fake blood running down his face. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. My mother let me stay home from school. I spent most of the day in my bedroom. I kept replaying Halloween in my head. Our teacher, Buddy, Jamie smiling when she told us the dog had died. Mrs. Miller screaming after Jamie whispered something to her. Agnes, Oliver. Then, Jamie's final words to me. "I wanted to take care of your little sister afterward." At that point, I still didn't understand it. I tried to convince myself it had all been coincidence. Maybe Jamie had simply been acting strange because of what was happening at home. Maybe he'd heard something about Buddy. Maybe he'd wanted to hurt Agnes because he was angry at the world. But I couldn't explain his costume. I couldn't explain the fake knife. And I couldn't stop wondering what he'd whispered to Mrs. Miller. That evening, my parents asked me to come downstairs. My father was already sitting at the kitchen table. My mother sat beside him. They both looked tired. Dad told me how sorry he was about Jamie. Mom said she knew how much he'd meant to me. For a while, we talked about him. They told me that what had happened wasn't something a child should ever have to understand. Then my parents looked at each other. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. "We have something we need to tell you." At first, I assumed it was more bad news. Instead, she smiled, a nervous, emotional smile. "You won't be alone anymore, Charlie." I stared at her. She placed her other hand over her stomach. "You're going to be a big brother." My father smiled. Mom squeezed my hand. "You're going to have a little sister." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My parents thought I was shocked by the news. They had no idea what Jamie had said to me on Halloween night. "I wanted to take care of your little sister afterward. But after this, I'm going to have to think about it." My mother couldn't have known she was having a girl when Jamie said that. As far as I knew, she hadn't even told anyone she was pregnant yet. And suddenly I remembered the other things he'd said. Buddy, Mrs. Miller, Agnes, Oliver, the fake knife, the blood. For years afterward, I tried to tell myself Jamie had somehow overheard my parents talking. Maybe he'd guessed. Maybe there was some explanation I simply didn't know. But even now, whenever Halloween comes around, I still think about him standing beneath the porch light outside Agnes's house with fake blood running down his face. And I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't fought him that night. Because sometimes the part that scares me most isn't that Jamie seemed to know how he was going to die. It's that before we stopped being friends, he seemed to know who was supposed to die next. Don't ever go near national parks, especially if you have children. I know how ridiculous that sounds. National parks are supposed to be some of the safest places to take a family. Beautiful trails, clean air, mountain views, wildlife, campgrounds, visitor centers. They're the places people go when they want to get away from everything dangerous about the modern world. That was exactly why my wife and I moved where we did. 4 months ago, we relocated our family to a small mountain town somewhere in the Rocky Mountain region. I'm not going to give the exact town or the name of the national park. After everything that happened, I don't think drawing attention to the place would help anyone. The town sits directly along the park boundary. Our house was one of the reasons we moved. The backyard opened toward miles of wilderness. From our porch, we could see pine-covered hills rising behind the property, broken occasionally by gray rock and narrow strips of open meadow. There were mornings when mist sat low between the trees, and evenings when the setting sun turned the mountains orange. For the first couple of months, it felt like we had made the best decision of our lives. My wife loved the quiet. I loved being able to work outside on the porch. Our boys, Aaron and Peter, loved everything. Aaron was the older one, curious, competitive, always trying to prove he could climb higher or run faster. Peter was younger and a little more cautious, but if his brother went somewhere, Peter usually followed. They spent hours exploring the edge of the woods behind our house. At first, my wife worried about them going too far, but there were boundary markers near our property, and we had strict rules. Stay where we could see the house. Never go into the park alone. Come inside before dark. They listened. For a while, everything felt normal until I started noticing the signs. The first one appeared around 2 months after we moved. I saw it taped to the automatic glass door of the local grocery store. It was nothing fancy. White paper, black letters, a few words printed large enough to read from several feet away. September 7th, 14th, Annual Week of Remembrance. National Park closed. No one permitted inside. I read it twice while walking into the store. Then I forgot about it until we returned to the car. Did you see that flyer? I asked my wife. She was putting groceries into the back seat. What flyer? Something about a week of remembrance. They're closing the park for a whole week. She shrugged. Probably some local event. Seems strange. Why? A whole national park closed for 7 days? I started the car. That has to hurt tourism. She looked at me. When is it? September 7th through 14th. She thought for a second. Isn't that around Labor Day? Exactly, she shrugged again. I'm sure they have a reason. I wish I had asked more questions then. After that, the signs seemed to multiply. I started seeing them in restaurants, on gas station windows, on the doors of churches, at the post office, inside the town hall, near trailheads, on telephone poles. Some simply announced the closure. Others mentioned Remembrance Week. Nobody seemed particularly interested in them. That was strange, too. People walked past them every day without looking. As September approached, I began to feel like my family was the only one in town who didn't know what they meant. Then my wife noticed something else. We were driving to the elementary school to pick up Aaron and Peter after their first day. She was looking out the passenger window when she suddenly said, "Have you noticed how few kids there are here?" What? It caught me off guard. Kids, she said. There hardly seemed to be any. I laughed slightly. It's a small town. It's almost 5,000 people. I thought about that. She continued. There's only one elementary school nearby. I asked their teacher this morning how many kids were in the boys' grade. And? 10, I looked at her. In the grade? Yes, that's small. There are only 95 children in the whole school. That was harder to explain. Still, I tried. Tourist town. Lots of retirees. Seasonal workers. Maybe families don't settle here. I guess. But she didn't sound convinced. Neither was I. When we pulled up outside the school, Aaron and Peter were standing beside their teacher, Miss Johnson. My wife immediately got out. "Hi, is everything okay?" Ms. Johnson smiled. Yes, everything is wonderful. Your boys were little angels today. Aaron rolled his eyes behind her. I smiled. Then the teacher handed my wife a sheet of yellow paper. The school wanted every parent to receive one. My wife unfolded it. Ms. Johnson smiled again. Have a lovely day. Then she walked back toward the school much faster than I expected. My wife stared at the paper. What is this? She handed it to me. There was only one sentence printed across the page. Remembrance Week, September 7th, 14th. Protect your children. I felt a small chill, not because of what it said, because of how little it explained. I looked around for Miss Johnson, but she was already inside. Another woman was walking toward the parking lot, holding the hand of a girl who looked about Aaron's age. I hurried over. Excuse me? She looked startled. Yes? My sons attend here. I showed her the yellow paper. Their teacher just gave us this. Do you know what it's about? The woman's expression changed the moment she saw it. She tightened her grip around her daughter's hand. The park is no place for a child, she whispered. Then she looked directly at me. Protect your children. Before I could ask anything else, she walked away. My wife came over. What did she say? Nothing useful. That night I searched online. I typed the name of the town along with Remembrance Week. Nothing. I tried variations. Annual Remembrance. September 7th. National Park Closure. Local tradition. Disappearances, accidents, nothing useful came up. No articles. No community posts. No old newspaper scans. It was as though the tradition existed everywhere in town, but nowhere online. Finally, I searched the national park itself. There, at least, I found confirmation that it would be closed from September 7th through the 14th. The official reason was planned maintenance. I stared at the screen. Nobody shuts down an entire national park during a major travel period for ordinary maintenance. At least, that was what I thought. Dad? I turned. Aaron stood in the bedroom doorway. You watching the movie with us? I closed the laptop. Yeah, buddy. For the rest of the night, I forgot about it. The next afternoon, my wife went to pick up the boys while I stayed home to finish some work. I worked remotely, and the porch had quickly become my favorite place. I could answer emails while looking over miles of untouched forest. That afternoon, I had been outside for maybe 15 minutes when something changed. The woods went silent. Completely, it happened so suddenly that I looked up from the laptop. The wind was still moving the trees. I could feel it against my arms, but I couldn't hear it. No birds, no insects, no leaves rustling. Nothing. It was like someone had muted the world. I sat very still. I don't know why. Some instinct told me not to move. Then something snapped in the woods. A branch, far beyond the backyard. Another snap followed. Then another. Something was walking along the hillside. Slowly, I searched the trees. At first, I thought it was a hiker. Then I saw something dark move behind the brush. Large, too large to be a person. Maybe a moose. That was what I told myself. The shape moved parallel to our property. I never saw it clearly. Every time I thought it would step into an open area, it seemed to remain hidden behind the trees. The footsteps continued, then passed. The moment they were gone, sound returned. Birds started calling. Leaves rustled. Insects buzzed. I stood from the chair and stared at the forest. Must have been a moose. Saying it aloud helped. Later, when my family came home, I mentioned it during dinner. I saw a moose from the porch today. Aaron's eyes widened. Seriously? Peter grinned. That's awesome. It walked right along the backyard. Can we go hiking tomorrow? Aaron asked. Yeah, Peter added. Maybe we can find it. I smiled. Homework first. That evening, everything was normal. The boys played outside. We watched a movie. Then we went to bed. Sometime after 2 in the morning, one word woke me. Dad? My eyes opened. Peter stood in the bedroom doorway. He was crying quietly. I sat up immediately. What's wrong? He hesitated. Someone is watching me. I became fully awake. Who? From the window. My stomach tightened. I got out of bed. Show me. Peter's room faced the national park. We still hadn't installed blinds over the large window. Moonlight illuminated the hillside behind the house. Trees, boulders, long shadows. Peter pointed. He's gone. Where was he? He pointed toward a small clearing near the upper slope. Right there. What was he doing? Looking at me. I looked at my son. He was genuinely terrified. Have you seen him before? Peter shook his head. No, what did he look like? He sniffled. His face was funny. That answer made me uneasy. But children have nightmares. I convinced myself he had woken up confused and seen a tree, shadow, or animal. I put my arm around him. Go sleep with Mom. Can you stay here? I'll sleep in your bed. He wiped his nose. Okay, love you. Love you too. Peter left. I lay down. For a long time, I stared at the window. Eventually, I started relaxing. Then, something moved outside. A warm light appeared near the bottom of the hill. I sat up. It looked like a glowing orb, maybe a lantern. Maybe someone carrying a flashlight with an old yellow bulb. The light moved quickly through the trees, too smoothly. It rose up the hillside, weaving between trunks as if following a trail I couldn't see. Then it reached the ridge and disappeared. The next morning was August 31st. Summer was effectively over. By afternoon, I had almost convinced myself the previous night had been nothing. I finished my work early so I could take the boys hiking. We chose a trail near the house. Technically, we could enter the park almost directly from our backyard, so we crossed the boundary markers and followed a narrow trail into the woods. The boys were excited, too excited. As the trail became steeper, I slowed down. They didn't. Don't get too far ahead. Okay. They disappeared around a bend. I climbed after them. When I reached the next ridge, I heard both boys shouting, Dad, you have to see this. I rounded the corner. A fire tower stood on the ridgeline. It was old, very old. A chain-link fence surrounded it, but part had collapsed. Several weathered signs warned people to stay out. We ignored them. That still haunts me. The tower looked like it had been built sometime in the 1960s or 70s. The wooden supports were worn and blackened. Fire had damaged parts of the structure. The metal staircase was rusted, but still intact. Aaron stepped onto it. Come on. Careful, he bounced experimentally. The staircase shook, but held. It's fine. Peter ran after him. No fair. I followed more slowly. By the time I reached the cabin at the top, both boys were already exploring. The small room had been badly damaged by age and fire. Windows were broken. The door hung crooked. Dust covered almost everything. There was an old desk, a chair, manuals, books, an ancient little kitchen area with rusted cans. In one corner stood a cot. That caught my attention. Everything else looked decades old. The cot looked new, perfectly clean, almost like a replica of military bedding from the 1960s. I walked toward the desk. An old calendar sat among the papers. 1962, it was open to September. Dates 7 through 14 were circled in red. I stared. Guess Remembrance Week has been around a while. The boys weren't listening. Aaron had pulled out a pocket knife. They were carving their names into one of the wooden beams. Hey, they looked at me. Maybe don't do that. Peter pointed. There are lots of names. He was right. Dozens, maybe more. Names covered the wood. But every single old name had been crossed out. A deep line cut through each one. Aaron, Peter, Their names were the only ones left untouched. Before I could say anything, Peter tugged at my sleeve. Dad, his voice was quiet. I think somebody's here. I went to the window. Where? I don't know. Then we heard it. Clang, something stepped onto the metal stairs. Peter grabbed my shirt. Clang, another step. The stairs groaned. Both boys moved behind me. Clang, the sound came closer. Someone was climbing. I backed toward the opposite wall. The footsteps reached the top. Then a man appeared in the doorway. He was slightly taller than me, clean-shaven, wearing an old-style park ranger uniform. Not modern. Something much older. His face was strange. He was smiling, but the expression looked forced. His eyes were small, dark, almost bead-like. He stared at us. Peter whispered behind me, "That's him." I barely moved. "What?" The man from my window. The ranger entered the cabin. "Sorry, folks." His voice was calm. "You can't be up here." He pointed toward the trail. "This is Forest Service property. Didn't you see the signs?" "Sorry," I said. "We thought the tower was abandoned." His smile widened. "You thought my tower was abandoned?" Something in his voice made me want to leave immediately. We were just going. He stepped aside. I grabbed Aaron's hand. Aaron grabbed Peter's. We moved toward the staircase. I had just passed the ranger when his hand closed around my wrist. "The boys stay." I stopped. His grip tightened. "What?" "They put their names on my tower." He looked toward the beam. "They cannot leave." My stomach dropped. "They gave themselves to me." Aaron's voice shook. "Dad?" "It's okay." I looked back at the ranger. "Get your hand off me." His smile remained. "We're leaving." He squeezed. There was a loud crunch. Pain exploded through my arm. I collapsed. My wrist bent at an angle no wrist should. I screamed. The boys screamed too. Through the pain, I heard movement. Their voices became more distant. Aaron. Peter. Then silence. I tried to get up. The ranger stood over me. His face was hidden by shadow. "Look at me." I did. My body suddenly became heavy. Sleepy, my vision blurred. "In 1 week," he said, "you won't even remember them." Everything went black. When I woke, it was night. My wrist was badly swollen. Broken, the cabin was empty. Aaron, no answer. Peter, nothing. I dragged myself upright. Then I saw the beam. Their names were still there, but someone had crossed them out. Aaron, Peter, both with deep lines cut through them. Aaron's pocket knife was stuck in the wood beside the names. I ran. I searched around the tower, through the trees, along the trail. I screamed until my throat hurt. Nothing, no footprints, no voices, no sign of the ranger, no sign of my children. By the time I reached home, it was after midnight. My wife opened the door. She had clearly been crying. "Where have you been?" Then she noticed I was alone. Her face changed. "Where are the boys?" I couldn't answer at first. "Where are they?" "They're gone." "What?" "Someone took them." I started crying. I couldn't stop him. She saw my wrist. Then she made this broken little sound and ran upstairs. I called the police. About an hour later, the sheriff came. We sat at the dining room table while I told him everything. He asked questions without interrupting. Then he said, "Did you see the man?" "Yes." "What did he look like?" "A ranger." The sheriff stopped writing. "A park ranger?" "Yes." "Modern uniform?" "No, older." His expression changed. "Were you at the tower?" I stared at him. "You know about it?" He leaned back. "They've tried destroying that tower for years." "What?" "Burning it, tearing it down, bulldozing the ground." He looked tired. "It doesn't matter." My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" "Eventually it shows up somewhere else." I stared at him. "What happened to my boys?" The sheriff looked down. "I don't know." "Who was that man?" "We don't know that either." He paused. "But he's connected to the tower." "And?" He only takes children. I felt sick. Where? We don't know. What does he do to them? I said we don't know. He looked directly at me. But if your boys aren't found by September 6th, they won't be found. What happened September 7th? He hesitated. Then everything started making sense. Remembrance Week. The sheriff nodded. September 7th through 14th is when he's strongest. What does that mean? It's when he finishes it. Finishes what? The sheriff rubbed his face. Everyone taken in the park starts disappearing from memory. I stared. What? Faces first. He tapped his temple, then voices. He continued. Names, I shook my head. No, by September 15th, nobody remembers who disappeared. That's impossible. I know. He looked toward the window. But it happens. How many? Hundreds. I stopped breathing for a second. Hundreds of children? He nodded. And nobody remembers? Not exactly. His voice became quieter. We remember that someone is missing. I didn't understand. You know the feeling when you walk into a room and forget why you went there? I nodded. It's like that. He swallowed. Parents know they lost someone. They feel it. But they can't remember who. I stared at him. Photographs change. He continued. Birth certificates disappear. School records. Medical files. Everything. No, families look at empty bedrooms and know someone should be there. Tears filled his eyes. They just don't know who. My chest tightened. That's why we call it Remembrance Week. The sheriff looked exhausted. We spend 1 week remembering that something is missing that we can no longer remember being taken. I stood. You need to find my sons. We'll try. No, you need to find them. We will search. For how long? Until September 6th. I stared at him. After that, my men won't go into the park. Why? Because after that, it becomes too dangerous. The search lasted 5 days. Police, park personnel, volunteers, dogs, helicopters, nothing. The only thing they found was one of Peter's hiking boots. On the morning of September 6th, the sheriff came to our house. I knew what he was going to say before he spoke. I'm sorry. My wife collapsed. We've done everything we can. No, we searched every place we could. No, I'm sorry. My wife hasn't left our bedroom since. She barely eats. Sometimes I hear her crying. Sometimes she sits completely silent. And I'm terrified, because I think it may already be starting. Earlier tonight, she looked at one of the framed family photos in the hallway for a long time. There were 4 people in it. Her, me, Aaron, Peter. She stared at the boys. Then, she asked me something. Why did we take this picture? I didn't answer. She shook her head and walked away. I'm writing this on the night of September 6th. I've packed everything I can carry. Food, water, flashlight, sleeping bag, tent, first aid supplies, maps, extra batteries, a knife, and photographs of my boys. I'm going into the park alone. I know the sheriff told me not to. I know what happens tomorrow. I don't care. I have to find them. This happened because of me. I took them hiking. I ignored the signs. I let them climb the tower. I saw those names crossed out and still didn't understand. I'm writing their names everywhere, on paper, on my arms, inside my backpack, on the photographs. Aaron, Peter, Aaron, Peter, Aaron, Peter. I keep repeating them aloud. I don't know if that will help. Maybe writing this story will help too. Maybe if someone else reads their names, part of them will remain somewhere. I don't know how this works. I don't know what that ranger is. I don't know where the tower will appear next. All I know is that tomorrow is September 7th, and I can already feel something changing. I looked at Peter's photograph 10 minutes ago. For just a second, I couldn't remember how old he was. Then I looked at Aaron's face and had to concentrate to to remember the sound of his laugh. That terrified me more than the tower, more than the ranger, more than my broken wrist. I'm leaving now. If I come back without them, and if by September 15th I no longer understand why I wrote this, then at least this story will remain. At least these words will. Aaron, Peter, those are my sons. Those are my boys. And if you ever find yourself living near a national park where the locals warn you about a week of remembrance, listen to them. If they tell you to protect your children, do it. If you find an old fire tower that looks abandoned, turn around. Do not climb it. Do not touch anything inside. And whatever you do, never carve your name into the wood, because I'm going into the park tonight to find my children. And the worst thing isn't that I might not come back. It's that I might. And when I do, I'm afraid I won't remember why I went in. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.